Great. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Laura Shaughnessy. I serve as the chair of the Professional Counselor Advisory Committee of the Kansas City, can I start over? Of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I asked the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that's being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Jim Kilmartin.
Present.
Great, good morning. Harriet Bachner.
I'm here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Melissa Briggs.
Present.
Present. Welcome. Welcome. Michael Countryman.
Present.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Michelle Fairbank.
Present.
Welcome. Acha Goris.
Present.
Acha, am I saying your name correctly?
You're correct.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Names are important. Bob
Thank you.
Kircher.
Here.
Good morning.
Morning.
Vanessa Perez.
Present.
Good morning. Welcome.
Morning.
Andrew Secor, we know he's not here, so we get to pick on him a little bit today. Adil Torres Rivera, you on here?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, I don't have you on my screen. I only have so many screens, so I didn't see you. Well, welcome. Glad you're here. I note the following BSRB staff members are also present. David Fye.
Here.
Good morning. Leslie Allen. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm here.
I see you. Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the Executive Director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting as no individuals requested to provide public comment. Because we are conducting this meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is being conducted by a medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of the KOMA are not suspended, so we'll be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On October 28th, 2022, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of advisory committee meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda by sending an email to david.fye with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows members of the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if there are any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And the conference call line is active. I did not hear anyone on that before the meeting started, but if I hear any beeps and someone enters the conference call, I will let you know.
Thank you, David. Okay, the meeting is now called to order and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on its agenda, which is agenda approval. David Fye did a great job of sending out all the information that you'll need for our meeting. One being our agenda. Does anybody have any questions about what we'll cover today?
Motion to approve.
Okay, I have a motion for Jim. I need a second.
I'll second it.
Oh, go ahead.
No problem.
Okay, so Michelle Fairbanks seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Anyone?
Hi.
Anyone opposed? Okay, the motion passes. So the agenda is approved. Well, the first item on our agenda, I'm very excited to facilitate. So we have 4 new committee members and you're joining a very talented group of people. And so I'm really excited to hear from all of you. And so we're asking each of you to talk a little bit about yourselves and introduce yourselves. And then the current members of the advisory committee will also respond so you know a little bit about each of us. So who would like to go first and introduce themselves?
I can go.
Okay, please do.
So I work for the Mental Health Association of South Central Kansas here in Wichita. I am originally from Southwest Kansas. I actually grew up in Ulysses over by like Garden City and Dodge City. So I know my rural area over there. But I've lived all over Kansas for the most part. I lived in Kansas City for about 10 years and then moved out to start my career. Actually, I started out in Western Kansas once I got licensed. And then I ended up here. I've been here in Wichita for about 3 years. I work mainly with residential care, which is a new area that I've never worked in before. So we run a couple of adult mental health group homes here in Wichita, and I oversee those group homes. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here. I'm not sure how much more you want me to share.
Well, that's a terrific start. I know we'll get to know you more over time. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Thank
I'm
you.
happy to be here.
Thank you. Who wants to go next?
Well, I'm Michael Countryman, and I am the Executive Director for South Central Mental Health Counseling Center. That's in Butler County. More important than that, I have 2 children. I've been married for over 20 years, and I've also been a licensed therapist for over 20 years as well. Don't really have a lot to share beyond that, but I do appreciate the offer to be here and participate, and I look forward to being on the board.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Michael. Who wants to go next?
I can go next. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Melissa Briggs. I kind of have a very well-rounded career. I am the Chief Administrative Officer at TFI Family Services, and then I am also an assistant professor at Kansas State University. I teach in the drama therapy and in the counseling departments there. Prior to that, I was at Emporia State, teaching in the counseling department there. I have gone to multiple universities in the state of Kansas. I started at Pittsburgh State University, where I received my master's degree and an EDS degree many more years ago than I would like to say. And then I went to Kansas State University to receive my PhD and to earn that. And then MNU to be trained as a play therapist. So I'm a play therapist, a drama therapist, and do a lot of supervision of counselors and play therapists. I also have a private practice in Topeka where I primarily see children and families. It's a really small practice, but I like to keep my skills and engaged, and I love to learn. So I'm always eager to try out new evidence-based models. And so I keep very busy. I also have, my husband's a professor at K-State also, and we have 6 kiddos, which keep us super on our toes and very lively. Other things, really, I'm excited to be here. I love to be involved with other professionals and to just kind of learn and gather and provide insights. And so I'm eager to learn about each of you and to share more about who I am.
Thank you. Thank you and welcome. Okay, Acha, looks like you're up.
I have to. Okay, my name is Acha Goris. Let's see. I have I've been teaching at MNU for the past. I've been in counselor education for the past 13 years. I was in Lindsey Wilson College in Kentucky for 4 years, and then I've been with MNU. I was with MNU from 2013 to just very recently. I was taught in the counseling program there for 9 years, and then right now I'm actually on the military base at Fort Riley. I love what I do here with soldiers. It is like after counselor education and doing what I'm doing now, it's like everything comes together. And with soldiers, you never know who walks in here. So I'm excited to work with soldiers. I see almost something between 5 to 7 soldiers a day. So I end up with almost a full load on a weekly basis. So it's very different from everything I've done the past 13, 14 years. And I'm really excited to be part of this board. And it was good to talk with Dr. Fay yesterday, just find out what I'm supposed to be doing. And I talked to my boss today, he was excited and I'm excited. So great to be here.
Terrific. Thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you.
Well, let's hear from the advisory committee members that were already here. I want you to each introduce yourself and let our new ones get to know you a little.
Since I'm probably the old guy, my name's Jim Kilmartin. I am retired. I retired from Stormont Vale Health after 40 years. I was an ancillary services director, and I was also the corporate compliance officer and risk manager. My dual career took me with the City of Topeka Fire Department, where I retired from there as a deputy chief. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
I guess I could go next. I'm Bob Kircher, and I'm an associate professor of counseling at the University of St. Mary. We're based not only in Leavenworth, but in Overland Park, have a office there as well. And I'm an LCPC and have been had a career as a counselor in schools for 33 years and retired and became a counselor educator. And have been doing that for 13 years now. And been on the board on this committee for, I think, 5 years. I think this is my 5th year, if I'm not mistaken. That's me.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay, I guess I can go. I'm Michelle Fairbank. I'm located in Hays, Kansas. I have a private practice. I'm an LCPC, and I also am an adjunct professor for Fort Hays State. We run a walk-in clinic with the interns that are in their practicum and in internship through Fort Hays on Mondays and Thursday nights. Kind of something we're trying to get off the ground is a walk-in clinic. They can see an intern, and just walk in. So just been on the board, I think. It may be just a year is all, but I've enjoyed it and I'm looking forward to continuing, and welcome to everybody that's new.
Thank you, Michelle. Adil, you want to go?
Yeah, you go ahead.
So I don't know who's going on. I'm Harriet Bachner, a retired associate professor from Pittsburgh State. I was in the psychology and counseling program, teaching in the counseling courses. Since I've retired, I've been doing some consulting. I recently have gotten some training in integrative and nutritional health for mental health professionals and plan to do some workshops in the area. I've also done some consulting recently. And prior to teaching at PSU, I had a private practice in Dallas for 20 years as a family therapist and a licensed professional counselor. I've been on this committee. This is my 2nd year. And hi, Melissa. Melissa was one of my students from PSU.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Harriet.
Okay, it's me. I've been a counselor educator for 35 years. I'm in Wichita State. I was born in Wichita State to deal with Latino issues. But I also have 12 years, 6 months, and 3 days in the United States Army as a behavioral science specialist. So I've been around the block a little bit. I don't plan to retire. I don't know what that means. They retire when they retire me. So I don't know if that's masochism or what, but I've been here for a year and looking forward for the next couple of years. So welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Adil. So Leslie, would you please say some things about yourself?
My name is Leslie Allen. I am the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager for the BSRB, and I have been with the BSRB for 23 years.
She knows everything. No
Hey,
pressure.
Laura, can I clarify something?
Sure.
Just for the new people, I got wrapped up in Topeka. My whole life was in Topeka, and I've just moved to Shawnee, but I was actually the deputy chief at Shawnee Heights Fire, which is outside the city of Topeka. I forgot the thing there. So
wow.
Anyway.
That's cool. I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
I got the knees and bad back to prove it.
Well, and I think I'll just step in and introduce myself too. I'm David Fye, Executive Director for the BSRB, and I am really happy to meet all of you. We've communicated a little bit by email, but it's nice to be able to put a face with the name and get to know you all more. I really appreciate you all volunteering to serve on this advisory committee. I think you'll find it to be very valuable. Just a little about myself. I've been with the BSRB as Executive Director a little over 2 years now, and I agree with Laura. Leslie Allen, the Assistant Director, does know everything. And so she's been a huge help to me, becoming more involved in my role here. And one of the job responsibilities I have is not just to work with the board members, but each of the professions has a separate advisory committee. And the work that you all do at these meetings is really valuable for the board. You're going to have discussions on a number of topics and recommendations, and being able to forward that information back to the board and ask, for different requests or to, recommend really positive changes is really helpful, since we do have what some states refer to as a composite board, which is made up of professionals from different professions. And we also have public members on the board too. And so excited to meet all of you and looking forward to working with you more over this next year and then future years to come.
Thank you, David. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Laura Shaughnessy, and I am the chair of the advisory committee. I'm also the counseling board member for the BSRB. And so I'm the conduit for all the work that we do here. Actually, David Fye is the conduit, but I'm the figurehead of that. He does the work, the hard work. I have been in private practice for 25 years. I do marriage, family therapy. My main work is with couples, and I do trauma work, and I really love that. That's been something that's taken over in the last 5 to 7 years that I really like and feel passionate about. I've been on this board for this committee for 2.5 years, and the board for 2.5 years. I joined during COVID. In October, I got to meet my fellow board members for the first time, which was a big deal. I met David Fye this summer when we went to a conference together. That's when things really hit the ground for me. I really feel like my role, it became more solidified, what my role was. For us, our role is big. We are the voice of what happens for counselors in the state. And that's in some ways humbling to me, because I have not been an educator. That is one of the reasons that I value all of you so much, because you are doing the work and implementing the work as, running programs, doing counselor education, running programs in the state. You're doing the work that you now get to affect and are affected by. So your voices, your experiences are so important. So I just can't thank you enough for agreeing to give your time and your efforts to this committee, because it really is impactful. The things we talk about are, they go to legislation, they impact everybody that, in our profession. So again, thank you for your time with that. We have a lot of great things coming up. We work fast. There are a lot of things happening, and I give David Fye a lot of credit for that. I mean, he came in 2.5 years ago with fresh eyes and said, here are all the things we need to revamp. And he's slowly making all of that happen, leading that. So I have great appreciation for David and Leslie and for what they know how to do. And so I really see my role as a few things. Of course, I am the chair of the committee, but I feel like some of the naive questions I ask sometimes result in good changes. I also think that my role is really to facilitate good conversation and good ideas between all of you. So that's how I think about what happens when I show up here. That being said, that's who I am. And again, welcome and thank you for your time. And unless anybody has anything else they want to add, we can move on to our next item on the agenda. Does anybody have anything they want to add right now? Okay, so David Fye, you're going to talk about COMA.
Yes, and so for each of the new advisory committee members, we do a more formal training every year, usually in the spring, and we take some time and go over sort of your role as an advisory committee member within the framework of the overall work of the agency. We are the BSRB, the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board, and the board itself. There's certain expectations for board members. But then also involved in that process is the really important role of the advisory committee. And so we will go over advisory committee member responsibilities. We will talk about some of the different elements as a state agency. We are required to follow certain procedures based on us falling under the Kansas Open Meetings Act. And also there's requirements that fall under the Kansas Open Records Act. And so even though I'll talk about those two things in more detail in the spring, for some of you that are new, I know you're going to be anxious to really be helpful and doing a lot of work. I just want to make a couple comments to make sure to steer you in the right direction until we have the more formal training. First, at the beginning of the meeting, I read a little bit of information about this being a remote meeting, and we talked about that we publish information on the website. We also use the Kansas Public Square to put information out about meetings in advance. So some of the requirements of having an open meeting is that we have to provide notice and timeliness. Sometimes there can be individuals who provide public comment, but that's not a requirement for groups under that Kansas Open Meeting Act. But if individuals want to provide public comment, they can reach out to me, and then I talk with the chair of the board, and based upon the relevance of the topic and also how many items are on the agenda, we can have discussions about those types of things. But in terms of a lot of the technical aspects of the meeting, we'll handle those. A meeting is constituted when you have a majority of the members of a committee that are talking about behavioral sciences regulatory board business or advisory committee business. And it doesn't have to be a formal meeting. It could be just if individuals met outside of a meeting, if individuals had a phone call, or if individuals had discussions on something even like an email communication. So you want to be careful not to have discussions between a majority of members of the committee outside of a formal committee. Now, working as a facilitator in my role, I am able to contact you. And so if you ever have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me about clarifications on anything. Just, be cautious of reaching out to the other members of the committee outside of a committee. A lot of the work that we do really does have to be inside of an actual committee itself. Now, sometimes there are subcommittees, and those subcommittees, if they are formal subcommittees, they also fall under the Open Meetings Act. And so we'll make sure to follow those requirements. But I want you to know that if you ever need to reach out to the chair of the advisory committee, you're free to do that. This doesn't mean that you can't talk to each other outside of the meeting. It's just complicated when you get to involving a majority of members of the committee. So just wanted to caution you on that. Also, in terms of your communications, such as emails or letters, as they relate to your work on this advisory committee, those are things that could fall under the Kansas Open Records Act. So just be mindful. I know you all are professionals, but be cautious in your terminology, even if it's just an email or a communication that seems not so formal. Just be mindful that those records could be pulled into other proceedings potentially based on your involvement with this committee. So just wanted to caution you on that and make sure that you were familiar with some of those basic rules. But if you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to me either by email or if you want to set up a phone call, and I'm happy to talk to you more about it. But don't mean to scare you, but it's always nice to just kind of have an outline of some of these requirements we have to follow at the very beginning. So do you have any questions about the Kansas Open Meeting Act or Kansas Open Records Act at all? Okay, well, like I said, if you do have questions after the meeting or between now and the next meeting, feel free to reach out to me and I can go ahead and help you out over email, or we can set up a time to visit more on those topics.
Thank you, David. Okay, the next item on our agenda is approval of minutes from some meetings that have taken place recently, and in your packet you were emailed those meeting notes. We have subcommittee meetings, and then the our last advisory committee meeting notes from October 3rd, 2022. So there were 3 sets of notes. Does anybody have any questions or changes that need to be made to those meetings, to those notes on those meetings? Okay. And for our new folks, it was an opportunity, hopefully, for you to review some of the conversations and things that we have been taking place this fall. So if there are no changes, what I need is a motion to approve the meeting notes. And David, do we need one separately for each group of notes, or can we do them all?
Let's go ahead and have a separate vote for the minutes from the advisory committee meeting on October 3rd. And then if you want to have a separate vote, you can approve the minutes for both the subcommittee meetings at the same time if you want to do that.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, so the first thing I'll ask for is a motion to approve the meeting notes from our advisory committee that took place on October 3rd.
I move to approve.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone
Laura, quick question. On these, do you want the new members to be voting on these since we were not involved, or do we vote on these?
That's a good question. They're here and part of a quorum. So David, what do we do?
So it's perfectly okay to vote on these. For the subcommittee minutes, we will need individuals to vote on those who weren't present. So we'll just kind of ask if you don't see anything that would be, objectionable or something you think would be an obvious fix, to go ahead and vote on those, just because of the nature of those subcommittees being fewer members in the full committee. But yeah, feel free to vote on these if you would like. If you wish to abstain, you're always free to abstain from a vote as well. And if you do want your abstention noted in the minutes, just let us know that, and we can keep track of that after the vote for the minutes for next time.
So they can vote on the October 3rd board or advisory committee meeting. Everybody can.
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for asking that question. Okay, so we need a second then for the meeting notes from October 3rd.
I second.
Who said, was
second.
that Adil?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Adil seconds. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the minutes have been approved. Okay, now let's do the subcommittee meetings on unprofessional conduct. We had 2 meetings, July 18th and September 30th. I need a motion to approve those.
I would make the motion to approve the minutes of the subcommittee on unprofessional conduct regulation review from the July 18th meeting and the September 30th meeting. Do we have to do them separately?
No, we can vote on those together.
Okay. I would make that motion then.
Thank you, Bob. Need a second?
I can second them.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Michelle. Michelle seconds. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, those minutes also passed. Thank you so much. Okay, our next executive director's report. David Fry, take it.
Okay, thank you, Laura. So at every board meeting and every advisory committee meeting, I provide updates from recent meetings. There have been a couple of meetings of the board since the last time the advisory committee met. So I wanted to go through some of these. Those are pretty important recommendations or changes the board has made. So every year, the board of the BSRB has an off-site planning meeting. This past year, we had it in Olathe on October 24th, and the board had a full day meeting and discussed a number of different topics. First, for some of our application reviews, especially those for individuals who received their education from a program that was not accredited by the national accrediting body, the BSRB sometimes will use outside experts to do a review of the program and or the education that person received to see if they qualify for licensure under the regulations. The unfortunate thing is that based on the number of applicants we receive who meet that criteria, we have experts that assist us, but it would be helpful for us to have more individuals providing that service. So the board received some information about a company called the Center for Credentialing and Education, CCE, that is able to do some of those types of education reviews. And the board actually received a presentation at the November board meeting and was supportive of looking into possibly making an arrangement either with that company or another company doing something similar. So we're going to be moving forward with that, probably looking at issuing our RFP language or seeing if potentially there can be an agreement without going through the RFP process. So excited about that. Second, the board discussed license hearings. These are situations when an individual is denied for licensure or perhaps is approved by the board with certain conditions. They have the opportunity to request an appeal. And in the past, the board had been meeting with the full board for those hearings. Based on some advice from legal counsel, the board recommended going forward in the future with hearing panels made up of 5 board members. And there would be a member of the board for that profession. There would be a public member, and then the other 3 would be appointees at a board meeting. So for those license hearings, we're going to be using 5-member board panels for those going forward. Additionally, the board received information on impaired provider programs in other states and for some other agencies. There are programs set up when an individual practitioner is experiencing difficulties with substance use or mental health concerns. And for some of the other agencies, they're able to enter a program like this, or potentially it can be used as an alternative to disciplinary remedies when an individual has committed an infraction, but there's an involvement of substance use or mental health concerns. And so the board received some information and was supportive of trying to reach an agreement to have an impaired provider program utilized by the BSRB as well. And so we're in the beginning stages of that process, but we will probably be issuing an RFP to get a better understanding of the costs involved in a program like that and what other entities might be able to provide the board. But the board was supportive of moving forward and having a program like that for professionals under the board. Additionally, the board had a conversation about license requirements and reciprocity requirements. And involved also some discussion about a bill that passed during the 2021 legislative session that involved expedited processing of certain reciprocity licenses for military members and military spouses. And the board is supportive of looking at additional ways to assist with the reciprocity process and looking at maybe unique license requirements for the different professions and reevaluating some of those license requirements to see if they're still necessary for public protection, or perhaps if some of those may be able to be adjusted to be able to expedite licensure for certain people applying for licensure. So the advisory committees are looking at their license requirements and also reciprocity in general for areas which the board could possibly make adjustments or improvements. Additionally, we've talked a little bit in the past about how the equation for total number of licensees is it involves a few different pieces. And for example, when I talk about that, I say that a lot of the discussion on the professions in Kansas and the number of licensees, a lot of that discussion talks about individuals entering from the beginning of that process. And some individuals have talked about issues with workforce. How can we allow more people to become licensed and enter the professions? But part of that also involves the individuals who are currently licensed and trying to assist them to make sure that they maintain their licensure and continue to practice. And also individuals who may have let their license expire, finding creative ways maybe to allow those individuals to come back and practice in the future. So under that umbrella of a topic, one thing that the board was looking at as a creative solution was to reevaluate the reinstatement fee for individuals who have let their license expire. And what the board is supportive of is that if you have an individual who has not been practicing for at least a year, who is interested in coming back and practicing again, currently, what they would need to do is they would need to get all of the continuing education hours for the past licensure period and essentially pay a double license fee because the reinstatement process involves paying the license fee plus a reinstatement fine or reinstatement penalty. And so what this would do would be, as a way to motivate individuals to come back to the profession, the reinstatement fee for those individuals would be cut in half. So it would just be the normal license fee. And the board would also be creating a new temporary 6-month license so that individuals could begin to start practicing while they're attaining those necessary continuing education hours. And then they would be able to work while getting those hours before their license could be fully reinstated to a permanent license. So the board is looking at creative solutions to try to address that issue. And I think that'll be something we will be putting into a bill for the legislature this coming spring. Additionally, the board recommended a couple changes to the behavior analyst profession. The behavior analyst came under the board, I believe, back in 2014, and they began to be licensed in Kansas maybe as early as 2016. There is currently not a board member that is in statute for the behavior analyst profession. And the advisory committee for the behavior analyst had requested that a board member be identified for their profession. And the board was supportive of putting that into a bill for the spring. So the board is going to be asking the legislature if they could add a board member for the behavior analyst profession. And so that will be in a bill coming forward. Additionally, the board was supportive of changes to a statute to make the number of disciplinary remedies equivalent with the other professions. When that profession was added, some of the language was a little more limiting in terms of if an individual commits a violation of unprofessional conduct, what authority the board has to issue fines and do public censures. And so one of the changes they recommended was to make those list of remedies more equivalent. So that way there would be more levels of discipline that would be fitting of a violation of unprofessional conduct. Additionally, the board is supportive of creating a new type of temporary licensure. For graduates of social work programs that are in candidacy for accreditation, the social work profession is a little unique to some of the other professions in that there is a specific process called candidacy that can last for 3 to 3.5 years. And while the program is in that candidacy process, they're meeting certain thresholds on their way to accreditation. But we have a situation in which individuals can graduate from those programs while they're in candidacy, but the school is not yet fully accredited. And based on the nature of some of those programs, they would not meet the alternate requirements for licensure in the regulations. But what this new temporary license would do is that if you had someone graduate from a program that was in candidacy for accreditation, they could get a temporary license while their program is still pursuing accreditation. And then once their program reaches full accreditation, that individual will be able to get a permanent license under the BSRB. So this would be another way for individuals to be able to start practicing earlier and would avoid issues concerning that lengthy in candidacy type process. Additionally, the last year, the board licensed psychology profession was supportive of a new continuing education requirement in diversity, equity, and inclusion and cultural competency and those types of topics. This year, the social work profession was interested in requesting legislation on that topic. I should mention too, the licensed psychology proposal last year was not implemented by the legislature. It was taken out of the legislation, so it didn't pass. But this year, the social work profession was interested in moving forward, and other advisory committees were having discussions on that topic. At the offsite planning meeting on October 24th, the board was supportive of adding a new requirement for continuing education in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion or cultural competency. And it was identified that some of the continuing education requirements for the board are a little unique in Kansas compared to other states. For example, there are currently 3 hours of ethics in continuing education that are required for all levels of licensure. And that ethics continuing education requirement is standard across other states and other professions. However, for levels of licensure in Kansas that are able to diagnose, there is a requirement of 6 hours of diagnosis and treatment every license cycle. And that is fairly unique to Kansas. You don't see that prevalence in other states. And so what the board was supportive of was for the levels of licensure that currently are required to have 6 hours of continuing education and diagnosis and treatment, they would recommend that we put forward in a bill this spring, reducing that requirement of 6 hours down to 3 hours, and then adding a new requirement of 3 hours in the diversity, equity, and inclusion, cultural competency topic. So the number of required hours total would not change. The specifically outlined topics that those hours would need to be in would be modified from 3 hours of ethics and 6 hours of diagnosis and treatment to a new proposal that would be 3 hours of ethics, 3 hours of diagnosis and treatment, and 3 hours in the DEI/cultural competency topic. For those levels of licensure that are only required to have ethics right now, such as the bachelor's level social worker and the assistant behavior analyst, some of those levels that are not able to diagnose, they would just have the 3 hours of ethics and then the new 3 hours in the DEI topic. So the board was supportive of that across the board for the professions, and we'll be putting that into a bill for the legislature to discuss this coming spring. Additionally, the board had a conversation about a requirement for licensure included for the professional counseling profession in KAR 102-3-3A. It's under section F, number 6. So there is currently language that allows certain individuals to be able to apply for licensure if they have a certain degree or one in a related field. But the requirements in that regulation mentioned that the individual who is chairing or directing the program would be required to have a degree specifically in professional counseling and did not allow for flexibility for another related field. And the board discussed that there could be issues with individuals applying for licensure who have a degree in another related field, but their director of their program was not someone who had a degree in professional counseling and who might have a degree in another related field. So the board made a decision to go ahead and change in the regulation to allow for the person directing or chairing the program to have a degree in professional counseling or an other related field. And there's been conversation about the definition for that other related field, but that is what the board decided to change at that meeting to increase the flexibility for individuals applying for licensure. So it's kind of complicated, but it would allow more flexibility for individuals applying from programs where the chair of the program had a degree in counseling or another related field as defined in the regulation. Additionally, the board last year had some lengthy discussions on records of deceased practitioners or potentially abandoned records. And this would be situations where perhaps a sole practitioner would have an office and then would either pass away unexpectedly, or perhaps records would be found. And the question would be, what can be done with these records? And so the board was supportive of adding language to the unprofessional conduct regulations to identify that practitioners should identify an alternate custodian of their records should they pass away unexpectedly. And so that is something we'll be moving forward with for the unprofessional conduct regulations for the professions. It would still need to go through the regulation process, but essentially how this would work would that be practitioners would need to identify who would be the alternate custodian of their records should they pass away unexpectedly. And then once that is put into the unprofessional conduct regulations, then the board would add a question to the renewal application that would ask practitioners to identify who that person would be. And then if an individual did pass away unexpectedly and there was a question about the custodianship of their records, the BSRB would be able to provide assistance in terms of who had been named to be the next custodian of their records. But part of it too is to have practitioners be mindful of making sure that there is someone to take responsibility for their records and to avoid problems like that in most situations. Additionally, there were a number of updates from the board meeting that took place on November 14th. The board did receive a presentation on the professional counseling multi-state compact and did have the opportunity to ask certain questions on that compact. The board decided between that November meeting and the January meeting to take the time to research the compact further. And I believe they'll be revisiting that discussion at the January 6th board meeting and potentially voting to support the compact or express other interest in terms of legislation that would be coming forward during the 2023 legislative session if the professional counseling compact was brought forward in terms of legislation. So that'll be something probably for the board's agenda at the January board meeting. Additionally, the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board has an appointee from the BSRB. I had been serving in that role, but the board had an interest in appointing a more permanent member to that grant review board. And so we had opened up that process and contacted each of the advisory committees to submit any individuals who were interested in serving. The board had talked about their interest was to have a current advisory committee serve in that capacity and also have someone who had experience with treating addiction and some of the other items that were identified in the statute that set up that grant review board. At the November 14th board meeting, the board appointed Jason Hess to be the board's new permanent appointee to the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board. So he will begin serving, and I believe he just had a meeting earlier this week. And so, but he's excited to serve in that role, and we're happy that Jason volunteered for that, and we think he will do a good job on that advisory grant review board. At the November 14th board meeting, the board also made some changes to the investigation policy. The board not only takes care of regulating the profession by licensing practitioners, but it also handles investigations of complaints against practitioners. And the board is guided by a policy for those investigations. And the board had been updating that this year, and they completed their final modifications to that. So a new clean copy of the investigation policy and updated will be available to the board at the January board meeting. Additionally, I mentioned that the board was looking at not just requirements for licensure from individuals entering the profession, but also looking for ways to be supportive of current licensees. For the licensed psychology profession, there was a regulation that allowed individuals to request more time to complete their continuing education hours if they had good cause for needing additional time to complete those hours, and they could provide a plan to the board, and there's a approval process for those individuals, but that was unique to the licensed psychology profession. And so there was discussion by the board about expanding that to the other professions, and the board was supportive of that. That'll have to go through the we'll need to pass a statute in bill form this spring, and then add some language to allow for that flexibility. But it will be slightly similar, but it would allow about 3 months instead of 6 months. It would call for extenuating circumstances to have needed to happen. But I think expanding that policy will be helpful because it will allow more individuals to be able to renew their license and have additional time to complete those hours if they do fall into sort of an extreme situation that would necessitate them needing more hours. And so our interest is making sure that individuals stay licensed and keep practicing, knowing that there are certain things that might come up from time to time, such as individuals who are experiencing temporary health issues or someone close to them. And so, so I think that expansion of that flexibility will be really helpful for current licensees. And then also 3 of the professions under the board, the addiction counseling, marriage and family therapy, and social work professions, had recently recommended a removal of, there's a regulation for the educational requirements for those professions that we refer to as the in-residence requirement. For most of those professions that we recognize a national accrediting body. And if an individual has received their education from a program that is not accredited by the national accrediting body, there's other standards that they have to meet in the regulation. And for some of those professions, a certain amount of their education had to be met while the individual was in residence at their institution. And the in residence definition required that they be physically present at the school. And so with the growth of online programs, there was a question of whether that physical presence requirement was still necessary for public protection or whether it could be removed. And for the addiction counseling, marriage and family therapy, and social work professions, they recommended to the board removal of that requirement that someone be physically present at the institution, which should open it up to allow more individuals from online schools to be able to gain licensure in Kansas. There's still a discussion about a face-to-face requirement that's listed there in the in-residence requirement. And I think that face-to-face component should have more discussion, but at least the requirement about being in the physical presence at the institution, that part has been resolved for those professions, though there could be some additional conversations on other topics. And then 2 last updates I wanted to make you aware of. The legislature, their sessions usually go from about January through the early part of May. However, in the interim, they have committees that meet. One committee that Leslie Allen and I recently attended was the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules and Regulations. There were a number of proposed regulation changes that we brought before that committee to explain and allow them the opportunity to ask questions. They were supportive of the changes that we discussed. We also held an open meeting on the regulations on November 8th. No individuals from the public attended that meeting to provide oral or written comments on the regulation changes. But they were voted on by the board at the November board meeting. And so those changes have been approved. They were published in the Kansas Register on December 1st, 2022, and they will become effective on December 16th, 2022. So we will be sending out a letter with a little bit of information about those regulation changes. That'll probably be coming out sometime in the next week, just to make sure that licensees are familiar with some of those changes. A lot of them have to do with syncing regulations with statutory changes from a bill that passed last year. And there's a couple more that deal with changes in a bill that passed for the social work profession a couple years before that. And there's some additional cleanup language in there as well. But we'll be sending out a message to all licensees with some additional information on the regulation changes. But those have been going through a lengthy process. They've been posted on the BSRB website for several months. And we had allowed some time for comment on those. And then the last item I wanted to make you aware of. So in my capacity as executive director for the BSRB, there are times that I'm invited to attend legislative committee meetings, either to present information or to be asked questions potentially. There is a special committee meeting this interim on mental health beds, and they are planning to have another meeting on December 21st, and they are planning to ask health regulatory agencies to have a representative present to talk about possible changes in licensure requirements or any efforts that are being made to assist with workforce issues, as I understand it. And so I will be present at that meeting on December 21st, and I can give you an update at the next meeting about the conversations that were had. There was an article recently in the Capitol Journal. It dealt mainly with, as I read the article, it focused mainly on the nursing profession, but I understand that there's other health professions that they would like to ask some similar questions to and just find out if there's anything that can be done to assist with workforce issues from an agency perspective. So I realized that was a lot of material, but I wanted to make sure that you were informed about some of those updates. So I'll go ahead and end my report now, and I can answer any questions if you have questions on those updates from the October 24th board meeting, the November 14th board meeting, or any other topics.
I have a question, David. When you were talking about the physical presence and residence, and you mentioned only 3 other things, is that because in counseling, that regulation doesn't exist?
No, so for the behavior analyst profession, they don't have that language in their regulations. So that's kind of a unique exception. For the licensed psychology profession and master's level psychology, their scope of practice is a little bit different, and some of the testing and the assessment courses, they discussed the in-residence piece, but they viewed that it would be very difficult to have some of the training on the testing and the assessments if that was done virtually. And so they still valued the in-residence physical presence component. So those 3 were kind of a little bit different. For the professional counseling profession, there has been some conversation on that, and that is still in the regulation. At the last meeting, there was discussion about possibly changing that, and it's on the agenda for this meeting later on today. But some of the conversation went, it basically asked questions about, would this go far enough for individuals who are applying from online schools? Because the language that we had been considering for the other professions was removal of the physical presence component, but to clarify that the face-to-face component could be met either in person or by screen, by synchronous communication by screen. But the issue is that some of those online courses may not be synchronous, it may be asynchronous. And so the question was, is that something that maybe a broader change or a larger scope change should be made to the regulation? So I think the advisory committee, from the comments I remember, they were supportive of removing that physical presence requirement, but exactly how to word that language, I think that was some of the discussion, and the advisory committee was going to revisit that today.
Okay, so the professor that asked me from Fort Hayes asked about that face-to-face, and that's going to be coming down the pike. Is that correct?
Yeah,
okay. That's how I thought I was understanding.
Yeah, so I don't think the advisory committee was opposed to that. I think it was just trying to decide what exact language should be added to the regulation or changed, and how far those changes should go. And so it wasn't, from what I recall, the last advisory committee, it wasn't denied. It was just, I think there needed to be some additional thoughts on that, and there was a plan to revisit that at this meeting. So
okay, thank you.
Hey, David.
Yes.
In regards to the custodian of records, would the person that inherits those responsibilities need to be a licensed provider? And would the client need to be informed of that during the start of therapy?
So there were conversations about that. So for the, I'll answer kind of in a roundabout way, so I apologize about that. For the Board of Healing Arts, there's a specific statute that outlines how to handle records for either abandoned records or records for someone who passed away unexpectedly. And they have a process set up, and they have a separate fund dedicated to assisting in that transfer process. And it's more of a formal procedure. We are a much smaller agency, and we lack the resources to really assist with a lot of the technical aspects of having those transferred over. We had looked at maybe partnering with the Attorney General's office for some of that, but their scope of when they seize records is fairly limited, and they really only take responsibility for records, as I understand it, if those records are in danger of someone from the public getting information that they shouldn't have, but they don't really deal with providing custodianship and transferring those over. It's more of, they would assume them to protect the public, and then potentially could destroy them if there is no place for those records to go. The BSRB talked about several different options and how to help out with this process, and there were some discussions about adding more detail in terms of how the records should be transferred over and the requirements for that. But I think that the problem is given the size of our agency and our general scope, there was a danger of how much involvement to get in that process. We see this come up maybe 2 times a year, so it's not something that comes up very frequently. And so I think the agency was looking at ways that we could be helpful without getting too complex in the requirements. And so as a starting point, I think the first thing was to identify that it would be unprofessional conduct not to have a custodian of records, identified in the event that you might pass away unexpectedly, or that the records might become available if they're abandoned or something like that. So that was kind of the first step, was to identify that we want practitioners to be aware that it is your responsibility to make arrangements. But as far as the detail of how those would be transferred over or the requirements, I don't believe the board really got too deep into the details with that right now. I think they just kind of wanted to establish the responsibility first, without outlining the process or the requirements for those records.
And we will continue that discussion in just a few minutes, some more of the nuances of that. David, I have a question.
Yes.
The announcement of the changes that are going into effect on the 16th, do you put those on the BSRB website?
So we do have the statutes and regulations all posted on the BSRB website, and those are current. And so when the new regulations become effective, we will replace the existing wording with the new wording. We also have a section of the website that has proposed changes to regulations, and that has had these proposed changes up for several months, but we will add an announcement on the top of the website that says, these proposed changes to regulations have now been implemented. And so we'll make sure to put something on there in addition to the letter we'll be sending out. So
thank you.
Yep.
Other questions for Dave? Okay, let's continue. Okay, so our old business, so we have 3 topics and David has framed them. So I think they'll be pretty easy to go into. These are topics for which we really want to encourage discussion, asking good questions, coming up with good ideas so that we can really make recommendations that take all of your ideas and experiences and professional knowledge into consideration. So the first one is discussion on unprofessional conduct regulations and the recommendations. Yeah, there was a subcommittee formed of advisory committee members to go through the unprofessional conduct regulations, and that work was done. And you received an updated copy of the regulations with the recommended changes. And so we are asking for questions, feedback, ideas about what you have received. David, do you want to do some more framing of that?
Sure. So what we sent out was the current unprofessional conduct regulations. So the changes have not been added to the document yet. Sorry about that, but yeah.
That was my bad. I assume.
Yeah, there's 2 versions here. One was just the regular unprofessional conduct regulations that's in KAR 102-3-12A. And then there's another document that is also a copy of 102-3-12A, but it is the text on the second document is a little bit wider. So that document is a little bit longer, and it includes some proposed changes from a past group of members of the Professional Counseling Advisory Committee who had identified possible changes. And so that was kind of what our starting point was, looking at the unprofessional conduct regulations. The subcommittee that met went item by item through 102-3-12A and made some recommended changes or comments. And what I have done for the meeting today is I put together the items that were included in the minutes from those subcommittee meetings, and I put them side by side with the current language of the regulations. And I thought it might be helpful. I could share my screen with that table, and perhaps the advisory committee could just walk through those and then maybe make some final decisions on changes to those regulations. And then when the regulation, if there's consensus and there's a decision to go ahead and put these forward, then these could be provided to the board so the board could see the recommended changes from the advisory committee at the start of the year.
Terrific. Go ahead and do that. Let's look at this. Yeah, please share your screen.
All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen here. And so, okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so if you haven't done a lot of reading through the unprofessional conduct regulations, I can just kind of frame it here. So generally, the way that the regulations are written is it basically says that committing any of the following acts would be considered unprofessional conduct. And then it outlines a long list of different topics. And so that is the general way that these are framed in the regulation. And so what I have done here in this table is the wording of the current regulation is on the left, and the proposed change or the discussion by the subcommittee is on the right. And so I thought perhaps we could go through these, and then you as an advisory committee could ask questions, or if you are in agreement with the work of the subcommittee, we could have these submitted to the board. So, so the first one was item 2, and item 2, specifically D, was what the subcommittee had discussed. And what item 2 says is, except when information has been obtained in the context of confidentiality, failing to notify the board within a reasonable period of time that any of the following circumstances apply to the person regulated by the board or applying for license or registration, including oneself. So this has to do with, it would be unprofessional conduct if you fail to notify the board within a reasonable period of time of any of the following things. And the item that they were looking at was item D, which says, has been convicted of a crime. And so the subcommittee members discussed whether conviction of a crime was sufficient or whether other language was needed, such as conviction of a felony. Some of the other professions have language that is directed more towards felonies. And so the subcommittee highlighted this item for further review at a later date. So they wanted to have additional discussion on that item, if it should be just conviction of a crime or conviction of a felony. So I wanted to bring that to you for any thoughts you had today on that topic. I can tell you there's not a broad consensus between the professions, but I do think that you know, it's not a case where all of them are one camp or the other. But I do think that probably the majority say conviction of a crime versus felony.
Hmm.
And this does not mean that it would be a violation to be convicted of that crime. This really has to do with notifying the board within a reasonable period of time that that has occurred. So it just has to do with failing to notify the board.
What, I guess my first question would be, why is it important for the board to be aware that a crime was committed? What do they hope to gain from knowing that?
And Leslie Allen, she is the assistant director and licensing manager. And I might defer to her on this topic because she's the one who really works with the board in terms of when these issues come up. Sometimes when someone is applying for licensure or someone is applying for renewal, we receive information about conviction of a crime or conviction of a crime that may not be a felony, but it may be related to potentially their ability to practice. So
in the reasons you can limit, suspend, revoke, not renew a license, there's felony and there's also a misdemeanor crime against persons. If someone committed that kind of a crime, there could be limitations set to their license. Also, the licensee is supposed to merit the public trust, and there are different crimes, you know, that says respect for the laws of the state and the nation. And so there are things that someone could do that could be considered something the board would want to keep track of, make sure that everything was going okay. Maybe put conditions for supervision on a license or something.
Okay, so if a crime was committed that could possibly be something the board would need to act on, they would need to be aware of all those crimes. I guess my concern with using the term felony is a lot of times a very serious crime can be committed that is considered a felony, but through the court system, it can be, I guess, reduced to a lower type of a crime.
Plead down.
Yeah, and we may not know it, and it could be very serious, but that's just my opinion.
Leslie, can you give a few examples of, do people, well, let me ask this question. Do people call the BSRB office and say, you know, I had a parking ticket. Do I report that? I mean, do people call in and want to understand what they should report and what they shouldn't?
Yeah, sometimes. If it's considered a misdemeanor, then it's a crime. So
Right.
yes.
So people do call and check that out sometime. Okay. Okay.
I guess that my only concern is when I was in the Virginia, one of the things that were happening was the people who had some ethical violations, have some misdemeanors, have some felonies, moved from Florida to Virginia, and that was never reported. Okay. And then in the process, what happened was that eventually the person were be a second offender again, you know. And then when they start to investigate, they saw that that person should have not have the right to have a license, a practitioner license, based on the past history. So I mean, I don't think it's one strong rule, but I think that the idea of just a crime give to us some wiggle room, you know, versus, you know, having something a little more stringent. At least that's my sense.
You're saying it would catch more considerable violations.
Yes, and it means that will allow the board to at least conduct some investigation, you know, I mean, you know, I mean, again, it's more work, but I think that the felony is a little bit more stringent for me. So, I mean, and the crime give to us some room, some wiggle room.
Okay, well, it sounds like there's consensus to go ahead and keep that language as crime. Okay, well, let's move on to the second item here. So the second item is item number 11, treating any client, student, directee, or supervisee in a cruel manner. And the subcommittee members discussed whether the more appropriate term could be used rather than cruel. I am not sure that I have a better term than cruel, but that was something that they had identified.
I guess I was thinking more in an unprofessional manner.
Maybe unethical.
Yeah.
Well, I think the committee was at the time, the subcommittee was really thinking about, you know, we know and would understand what cruel was when we see it, but it's hard to define it.
Right. Yeah.
And so the question is, what could we use? What could be used there that would be more descriptive and explanatory?
Even the word cruel is subjective. Okay, I mean, so I might see something based on my own cultural background who are deemed as being cruel, and where somebody is not. So I mean, I agree, but I don't know what the term is. So I guess in the same boat, you know. I mean, I think cruel is very subjective. But what are the terms we start out? Go ahead. Sorry.
Even a term like hurtful or harmful would be subjective. You know, hurtful to the perspective of the client or student.
We do use unprofessional and unethical, however. Those are terms that we all have been exposed to and have an understanding of.
That one, I believe there's a little bit more related to us, because I think that unethical and unprofessional, you know, tied to some of the regulations. Cruel is just too broad. So
I guess when I think of the word cruel, I think of really severe, like hitting or pushing or cussing at them.
Right, bullying.
And certainly wouldn't want that to occur. Is that what this statement is referring to?
Or demeaning.
Well, and all of those fall under unethical or unprofessional.
Yeah,
I agree, because even the whole idea of hitting, it depends what culture you come from. Okay, some cultural variation, and sometimes it's mean even the idea of the idea of cruel has some interesting implications, and it's based on how you define it from a cultural standpoint, you know. So I think that unprofessional and unethical, at least a little bit more go along with the profession and the pieces that we usually used to and understand it.
Yeah. I have some staff that think cruel is expecting them to do their job.
Exactly my point.
Yeah. And just for context too, I do not believe the term cruel is defined in our regulations. But this set of the regulations was last updated back in 2008. So there have not been any changes to the language in this for quite some time. And some of the flexibility with some of the language may be helpful at times because what happens is if someone files a complaint, there's a 5-member subset of the board and there's an investigation that would take place. The investigators would research any of the details and bring those before the board to see if a violation had occurred. And sometimes those are helpful to be flexible because there can be a different fact pattern for each situation. But if it is too broad and it's hard to understand what that term really means, that can also be difficult as well. So it sounds like that there may be a consensus to have the word cruel replaced with unprofessional or unethical.
David, were they, when they met and talked about this, was their consensus that the word cruel needed to be further defined?
The discussion was that the entire number 11 that's there for item 11, that it was very confusing and we needed to either clarify it or do something with it. And we weren't sure what to do with it. So that's the reason that we left it with a suggestion of defining cruel.
Okay, thank you, Bob.
It can certainly be changed to something else or leaving out the word cruel altogether. I don't know.
I believe that Laura have a good point in terms of unethical or because that also would go to the next point, unethical on unprofessional. Because that usually cannot tie it in. And the code of ethics of ACA should be revamped by next year again. So
yeah, I agree.
Okay. So it sounds like there's consensus to go ahead and change the word cruel to unprofessional or unethical. Okay. For number 12, the current language says discriminating against any client, student, directee, or supervisee on the basis of color, race, gender, religion, national origin, or disability. And so the subcommittee members recommended adding additional language to the regulation on discrimination to better match the American Counseling Association Code of Ethics. Okay, and if I don't hear a lot of comments, I might just kind of move to the next one unless that there's disagreement with some of the recommendations by the subcommittee. So
I like it.
So silence is consensus.
I like that concept.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then we'll move on to the next one, number 23, that it would be unprofessional conduct to engage in professional activities, including billing practices and advertising involving dishonesty, fraud, deceit, and misrepresentation. And so this is one that I had highlighted for the subcommittee. It might be helpful to clarify this regulation by changing the language from engaging in professional activities, including billing practices and advertising involving dishonesty, yada, 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 to engaging in professional activities, including but not limited to billing practice and advertising, because I don't believe the intent when this was worded was to limit it to only billing practice and advertising. And that's not how we interpret it, but just to avoid any kind of misinterpretations of people thinking it could only involve billing practices and advertising.
I agree.
That's a good catch. And that's why I appreciate your legal background, because that little change makes a big difference.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Number 24, that is listed here. So 24 was one of those. I mentioned that there had been a past group of professional counseling advisory committee members who had looked at some possible changes. So the current regulation is using alcohol or illegally using a controlled substance while performing the duties or services of a professional counselor or clinical professional counselor. The potential change that that past group had looked at was changing the phrasing to instead be being under the influence of any substance that impairs professional judgment while performing the duties or service of a professional counselor. or clinical professional counselor. So the subcommittee talked about both of those possible wordings. And so the proposed change would strike the existing using alcohol or illegally using a controlled substance and replace it with being under the influence of any substance that impairs professional judgment. The new language would precede existing language while performing the duties or services of a professional counselor or clinical professional counselor. So the subcommittee was supportive of the change that past group had looked at. Just kind of wanted to make sure that you all are in agreement with that modification to that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Sounds good.
I like it.
Okay. Then number 25, that it would be unprofessional conduct, making sexual advances towards or engaging in physical intimacies or sexual activities with one's client, student, directee, or supervisee. Subcommittee members expressed the need to support and protect students, and subcommittee members questioned the definition of the term active as it related to students or clients and students. I guess that would probably be what I think part of that discussion was whether it should be clearly noted that it would be for active clients, students, directees, or supervisees.
It should be all. I don't know. I mean, it's active means once there's no longer a student that you can do this.
Right.
Yeah, and Bob, I don't recall exactly the conversation at the subcommittee involving this one, but do you recall any discussion on this item?
Oh, you're muted, Bob. Bob's muted.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
No, I don't recall any discussion on that at this moment. I can't recall what that discussion was. I'm just wondering if it was related to. No, I don't really know.
Okay.
I'm not gonna hazard a comment there.
I would suspect that, the reason it should say active is, our ethics codes do not require that forever you would not have a relationship. So, this is a very common discussion in ethics classes. It wouldn't make sense to me that it would be a violation if you had a relationship with someone 20 years after they were your student. I could see from a professional and personal decision-making process, but regulations shouldn't should align with ethical expectations and standards. So I do think it should use the word active. Again, that doesn't make my decision-making process, but we're considering many people's decision-making processes. So,
okay.
On the other hand, once a client, maybe always a client. So you may not see somebody for a year or 2 years or 3 years, and then they contact you again for services.
But this is beyond clients. This is students, supervising.
So maybe there needs to be a separate statement regarding client.
Yeah, good
apart
comment.
from student, directee, and supervisee.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at number 26, they're defining 2 years. The next
Right.
one down is defining 2 years. So it seems to me like all of this is related and should be considered together.
Yeah, 25 and 26 do kind of go together. And maybe that was the reference to the active for 25 is to make sure that it's an active client, student, directee, or supervisee. That's really what's being targeted. And then in 26, it deals specifically with making sexual advances towards engaging in physical intimacies or sexual activities with or exercising undue influence over any person who within the past 24 months has been one's client. And
can I make a comment here?
Sure.
I think the ACA Code of Ethics says after 2 years of seeing a client, you can have a relationship with them. So if we're making any rule, we need to think about that because the ACA Code of Ethics talked about 2 years for counselors. And again, like don't remember your name, it comes up in the ethics class all the time. So my fear with putting the word active into 25 is because when somebody is your client and you're not seeing them, you've closed their file, they're no longer your client. Yes, we know that when somebody is your client, there's always this sense that they're always going to be your client, but technically speaking, they are not your client. And if somebody graduates from your program and they move away, they are no longer your student. The same way with supervisee and all of that. So yes, in a sense, you are still their supervisor, but the supervisory relationship ended. If it did, you're no longer their supervisor. So for me, the term active is a little redundant to say, or almost like, I think the relationship does end. So after the end of the relationship, the ACA Code of Ethics says after 2 years, you can have a relationship with them that is outside of the counseling relationship. So we have to be careful that we're not going against that, because that's, so that's my take on it.
So Asha,
And I believe that was the discussion at the time. When you take those two issues, 25 and 26 in isolation, I wasn't sure about the active, but that is the context that we were discussing at the time.
would it be possible to, and for issue 20 or part 25 to add active or for 2 years after engagement and then refer to item number 26?
2 years sounds like that's what the ACA code says. So 2 years would be good, because that's what the ACA code does say. So because after 2 years, this person is no longer your client, and the ACA code says you could have a relationship with them again, because otherwise if we say once somebody's your client, it's always going to be your client. We're not that's being disingenuous, because the relationship does end.
Yeah. So active and 2 years after active, and referring to 26, it would bridge those two, would it not?
Well, so 26 really deals with clients. And the current language of 26 was that someone should not engage in physical intimacies or sexual activities with someone who's been a client for the past, within the past 24 months. Now, the subcommittee was supportive of changing that length of time, stating that it shouldn't be 24 months, that they should never have a sexual relationship with someone who's been a client. So that's kind of the first topic. The second in 25 is looking at active students, but also looking at active clients, active directees, and active supervisees. So 25 is really directed towards a broader group of individuals, whereas 26 is specific to clients.
So if we took out client from that one and let clients be on 26, then we could leave 25 basically as is.
Yeah, I think that there seems to be a feeling of difference between somebody who's a student or a supervisee and a client. Whether it should be or not, I think people view it differently. And I think Laura might be making a good point that sticking the word client into 25 kind of confuses things.
Yeah, there are. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like perhaps the best way to resolve this would be to remove client from 25 and then add the word active for 25 for an active student, directee, or supervisee. And then in 26 to say, making sexual advances towards or engaging in physical intimacies or sexual activities with or exercising undue influence, any person who is an active client or has been a client within the last 24 months.
Yes.
Right. The way I'm reading the recommendation, though, is the recommendation is forever. Right.
And that was the language of the subcommittee. So that is something that should be discussed as well. Yeah.
As I don't know, as the guy representing the public, you guys can throw stones at me, but I think forever or never is a long time.
Yeah. Years ago, you couldn't have the ACA's ethics said you could never have a relationship with a client, and that was changed to better reflect the psychology's code of ethics. Mm-hmm. So I think it would be fair on 25, if we remove that client, to be able to say, current or active student, supervisee, directee.
Mm-hmm.
I think if the ACA has that, you know, their requirements is 24 months or 2 years, then I think for item 26, we probably should stick to the 2 years.
I
Is that
agree.
Does the ACA Code of Ethics have that for student directee and supervisee currently?
That's a good question. I don't know that.
Okay, well, it sounds like for 25, remove the word client and add in that someone would be an active student directee or supervisee. And for 26, add that they could also be an active client, and keep the rest of the regulation unchanged. So instead of making it never, go ahead and keep the existing language that it would be within 24 months.
Yes.
Okay. For number 33, claiming or using any secret or special method of treatment or techniques that one refuses to disclose to the board. So subcommittee members question the use of the phrase secret or special treatment and considered alternative language such as untested or experimental. Do you have any issues with that proposed change?
I like the untested, but I'm not sure about experimental. Because I mean, it's depend, you know, I mean, it's kind of like, so what does experimental mean? You know, so untested doesn't give you evidence-based pieces, okay? So I mean, it's more solid. Experimental, I mean, we still do experiments, you know, when we, you know, do talk therapy, you know, I mean, we hope the thing's going to work and it's evidence-based, but you know, so we can put both, but the little piece of experimental is a little easy to me. The untested is better for me. That's just me.
Hey, can I take us back to the last question, please? I'm just looking at the ACA Code of Ethics. I'm sorry about that, to bring us back. It says sexual and romantic relationships with former clients. Sexual or romantic counselor interactions or relationships with former clients, but their romantic partners and family members are prohibited for a period of 5 years following the last professional contact. So psychology is 2 years, counseling is 5 years, and social work is never.
Right.
So let's put that in perspective.
Wow.
Wow.
Sounds like you need to change the whole standard that says, let's follow the guidelines that you just read. And that way we don't have to keep changing it. If that's what the committee thinks.
Seems like we ought to be consistent then with what the ACA Code of Ethics is saying.
Yeah.
So as to not confuse
Mhm.
the issue.
Yeah, if we stick with the ACA, we're not going to confuse students and nobody's going to get confused because we're sticking with the ACA code.
And then does it say anything about students,
Let
supervisees?
me keep looking. I just saw client. I thought it was important because I did say it was 2 years, but it's actually 5 years.
It's a very important difference.
Right, and
Yep.
I think it's important, maybe we can indicate rather than putting the specific years, because again, this does change. So maybe we indicate that we are following the association's ethics standards. Like, is there a way to just write it in that way rather than if the ethics codes change, then do we have to keep coming back and changing this? Or if our intent is that we are following those every time, then we just keep it structured that way.
It's a good question. We've been encouraged not to do that because our legal counsel in the past has said when you identify a body in that sort of a situation, you lose control in terms of what they might do, and then you could be bound by a group that you have no authority over. And so they said, the specific language is fine to adopt, and if you want to bring over specific language on what positions groups might have, but to tie to a group would give up too much control over modifications in the future. So
that makes sense. That makes sense.
And it's
That means
but
sorry,
but it's important also to know the ACA Code of Ethics refer to the state law.
That's right.
Okay, not the other way around, okay?
Mhm.
So I mean,
Yes, I agree.
So even though that they give you guidelines, you know, they always kind of rely on the state law to follow.
So it's possible then that we could go ahead and keep we don't have to be tied to the ACA. We could still say our 2 years is what we want in Kansas rather than what the ACA says. It's still possible because I don't think that would be, as long as we stick with our 2 years as opposed to 5 years, we could do that. So.
It just seems that the 2 years difference and the 5 years difference would be confusing, though.
And not only that, I'm just of the opinion that if social work is never, I mean, do we really want to do just 2 years? Isn't 5 years more, I guess, it would deter you from entering into a relationship more than 2 years would, is what I'm thinking.
Mhm.
I hate to say it, but I think 2 years is more reflective of reality of what
Yeah.
can happen out there.
I still believe that 2 years is a little bit better than never. Because
Yeah.
and you know, I mean, APA is to use never. And they change it. Okay? So I think that, you know, I believe that 2 years is fair enough, but that's just me.
Yeah.
This is a very good discussion. Kind of sounds like to me to keep it at 24 months, unless I misheard, but go ahead and let me know.
I guess I would feel better about 5 years than 2 years.
I would too. But I think we should go majority.
Okay. Well, how about if I stop sharing my screen on that one? And Laura, maybe it would be helpful to go ahead and take a vote on this one because it sounds like there is some division. So,
Okay. So do we need a motion and then a vote yes or no?
so the current language of the regulation would be 24 months. So I think potentially, yeah, there could be, someone could make a motion to change that from 24 months to 60 months. That would be 5 years, I believe. And so,
Okay. So
math right on that? Okay.
yeah, you got it.
So can I make the motion then to follow what is it, Acha, you said the ACA guidelines? And I think we should just follow the ACA guidelines and stop instead of splitting the child.
So your motion is to move to 5 years.
The motion is to follow the ACA guidelines for each of the categories, which I believe Acha read is different for different types of, I think the 5 year was social work.
But hold on, because I think that if David was clarified in terms of following ACA blindly, you know, so we need to take the whole ACA thing off.
Yeah, we're recommended not to cite.
Yeah, we went 60 months or we went 24 months. I think that should be the motion.
Okay, I got it.
David, I have a question first.
Sure.
I'm looking at the actual sheets that you provided, not the ones that you had on screen, but the sheets that you had provided. Is this KAR 102-3-12A?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. When you look at what you provided in print to us, 26 looks like it says within the past 24, and it's been crossed out, and the requested says 60 months. Has been one's client's romantic partners, or the client's family member, or anyone with whom they have had power or authority.
Okay. And
that was the recommendation.
Right. So there's the current regulations, which say 24 months. There was the group that had looked at possible changes in the past. And so they did mark up this one as well. And so the past group professional counseling advisory committee members, they had talked about changing this to engaging in sexual behavior, including sexual harassment. And then they had recommended 60 months instead of 24. and also including client's romantic partners or the client's family member or anyone with whom they have power or authority. So that was a modification that they had recommended in the past. So that was also on the table as a possible option too. So.
And that's almost word for word the ACA Code of Ethics. Because it says counselors, before engaging in sexual or romantic interactions or relationships with clients, the romantic partners or clients' family members after 5 years following the last professional contact.
Is family member defined? Is that in the household? Is that steps? Is that, I mean, I think I'm a little old, but we live in a society where family has a very broad reach.
Even culturally, you know, that there's, in different cultures, people are considered family that aren't necessarily blood related. So how far does it extend out?
I went ahead and shared my screen with that proposed possible language of 26. And so, yeah, I do not believe that there is a definition of the term client's family members currently in the regulation for sure. So.
And I think, you know, the Code of Ethics does put it in there broadly on purpose.
The rest of the language on 26, the way it's been rewritten, I like, but again, we come back to that 2 years or 5 years.
I think it would be confusing to have the difference on the state level 2 years and then on the national with the Code of Ethics to be 5 years.
Yeah, it almost sounds like we would be maybe in opposition or not in agreement with our ACA Code of Ethics.
I think it would just be really hard for those new clinicians, you know, they may not know, well, which one do I need to follow? Which one trumps which one? And so it cause a lot of confusion, I think, for some newer clinicians.
Well, but I would go back and say that the ACA Code of Ethics is guidelines on refer to the state. So I think that at least our job would be to even approve this with that change 24 to 60 or disapprove. I think that.
Yeah, it's our decision as the state. Yeah, it's our choice because we are the state. We will be the state authority on what we decide to do. It is really our choice.
Yeah.
I definitely agree. The state has more power than the ACA, no doubt about that.
It has to be. So I think that will be the motion. The motion will be that we approve this as recommended from 24 to 60 or not, and that's it. Correct me if I'm wrong, David.
So there's the length of time, and then this proposed change to 26 also included a little bit of extra language, such as including sexual harassment, and mentioned the other individuals such as romantic partners, family members. So I guess there's two questions. One is the length of time, and then two is, do you want to use the existing language with another length of time, or do you want to go with this new language that's on the screen right now?
Can I make a suggestion?
Mm-hmm.
I suggest that we keep our language, not the ACA language. The language we had before, our language was clear and succinct. This is a little bit too cumbersome. It looks a little bit too broad. Just my take.
So the language that the subcommittee recommended on the chart that he had. That's the language you like. There we go.
Okay, so it would say making sexual advances towards engaging in physical intimacies or sexual activities with or exercising undue influence over any person who, and then one little modifications. If we took out active client from 25, you would say active client here in 26. But with that one change, it would just modify it within the past 60 months instead of 24 months.
So taking out client on 25, and then the recommendation is changing it to 60 on 26.
You would add in for 26 that they could either be an active client or someone who's been a client within the past 60 months.
Yes.
So do we need to take a vote?
Yeah, I think that'd probably be good at this point, since there's been so much discussion about different options. So
Okay, so I need a motion recommending that we change the language on 25 to take out client. And then on 26, adding active client and client up to 60 months. I need a motion to vote on those two things.
I
Are
move.
we putting
Is that
those
right?
together or separate?
It doesn't really matter. We could do them separately.
So I move.
So you're making a move, so you're, say again?
Yeah, I make the motion, change the 24 to 60, and keep the language as it was in terms of, rather than putting a little bit of family, all this stuff, just the way it was. The only thing we're changing is 24 to 60.
Okay, so let's do that as a separate motion. So a motion to change 24 to 60 and keep the rest of the language the same as recommended by the committee. I need a second.
Well, I have a question. Weren't we also putting in active? Was that in there as well?
Yeah.
yeah, so it'd be changing from 24 to 60, and then including that it could be an active client or someone who had been a client within the last 60 months. So
Yeah,
Second.
move 25. Okay, Jim Martin, second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Okay, let's go back up to 25. So I need a motion to take client out of 25. Is that correct?
yeah, and I think there was broad consensus to do that. So I don't know if we need to vote on that one specifically, but
Okay.
yeah. So it sounds like there's consensus to go ahead
Okay.
and just remove client from 25 now that it's addressed fully in 26.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
And
Now
there's
you know why you're here.
and there's several more unprofessional conduct regulations to go through, but in the interest of time, I think it might be helpful for the advisory committee to have a little bit of time to talk about the education regulation to see if we could kind of reach a decision on that one. That way that could be forwarded to the board for the January meeting. So sorry to request a jump around in the agenda, but it might be helpful to do that before we run out of time today. So
Thank you for that.
Yep.
Okay, do you want to go ahead and frame that, David?
sure. So you have a document that is labeled 102-3-3A, and I'll go ahead and pull up a copy of that and share it on my screen. So 102-3-3A is the educational requirements for licensure for the professional counseling profession. And in the past, okay, you should see 102-3-3A. In the past, so we talked about this just briefly earlier, for individuals who receive their education from a program that's accredited by the national accrediting body, KCREP, those individuals were able to expedite licensure for them. But one of the things that Kansas has that's a little unique is we offer more flexibility to individuals applying for licensure. So we don't make it a requirement that someone have a KCREP accredited program. We are able to evaluate them separately based on requirements and regulations if they're not from a KCREP institution. But one of the requirements is that if they are not from a KCREP program, then currently they have to have received half of their education while in residence. And the definition of in residence basically included a requirement that the student be present at the physical location of the institution for the purposes of completing coursework during which the student and one or more core faculty members are in face-to-face contact. And we talked a little bit about some of the other professions removing the requirement that the student be at the physical location of the institution because of the prevalence of online schools. So there's two pieces here. One would be to remove the requirement that the student be at the physical location of the institution. And so it would still call for there to be face-to-face contact between the student and core faculty members. But there was some additional language that had been discussed that would clarify that face-to-face contact could be either in person or by synchronous video conferencing. And so that would just follow the end of the in-residence definition and would allow for individuals to satisfy this requirement if they were either physically there at the school, or if they were taking online classes, they could do it through synchronous video conferencing face-to-face by screen with the professors. If you have a copy of the minutes from the last meeting, that might be helpful to kind of talk about. It could be from the October 3rd meeting. If you go to those minutes, there on page 2, there's a discussion about possible changes to KAR 102-3-3A. And there was a question about if it might be more beneficial to individuals applying from online schools to not include the synchronous video conferencing, but instead to say perhaps by face-to-face synchronous or asynchronous interactions. And so I think that was what had been discussed, and the advisory committee was going to revisit that because it does sound like some of those online classes are not always synchronous video conferencing. But if it was synchronous or asynchronous, then that might allow some additional flexibility for some of those individuals taking those online classes. So I wanted to revisit that and get comments from you as advisory committee members to see if you thought that would be a beneficial change for the regulations.
Can I ask a quick question, David? These are only for 50% of their coursework has to be face-to-face synchronous and used to be in person or physically located. If we change that, is that saying that they could do an entire program and never ever do any live supervision or any type of actual face-to-face learning? That's concerning to me as a
concerning to me as well. I
We're getting flexible and I'm all good for flexibility, but there is a line in training professional counselors that I do think you cannot just learn all of it from online videos.
Yeah, so there's a couple pieces to this, and Leslie Allen, feel free to jump in to add to this as well. So the definition of in residence, it not only talks about the face-to-face contact, but it also talks about it being in front of core faculty members. So there's currently a requirement for those non-CACREP applicants that 50% of their courses have to be physically at the school. Those courses also have to be in front of core faculty members, and they also have to be in face-to-face contact. So the original proposal was to remove that 50% requirement as far as being physically present at the location, but it would still require that to be with the core faculty members, and it would also require that to be in face-to-face contact either in person or by screen. In terms of if this was changed to synchronous or asynchronous, and if that meant that there wouldn't have to be any face-to-face contact. Leslie, do you mind commenting on that?
Yes, that would be in line. KCREP currently has programs that are 100% online. They do not have any face-to-face in residence requirements.
But they're synchronous.
No, they're not. If you go to a KCREP program, you can go to Capella. I believe Walden has one. And there's another one that can be, it's all online. It's not synchronous.
But even Walden and Capella, they have the internship is a component in which they have to spend some time on campus face-to-face with the faculty. So
That's true.
That's not what Andrew said.
Well, no, Andrew, well, that's what KCREP said. Okay, so I mean, because if you go back, you look in terms of Capella and what's the other one?
Walden.
You know, they look specifically at those two components in terms of the internship and practical. I think it's the internship only.
How do they go to the campus if they don't have a campus?
Well, they have to. Where did they do the internship?
They do their internship outside.
Yes.
Yeah, at agencies.
It's a field experience in an agency.
Yeah, the field experience. The fifth
Right,
grade-
so they're not at the campus. This is talking about the campus of the school.
And I think I'm okay with people being online. To me, it's the aspect of all coursework. I don't know how anybody could be doing internship supervision asynchronous. I mean, I'm not sure what they just email back and forth.
No, perhaps something would need to be added. There's a required internship, so perhaps something would need to be added about that.
So my concern would be more around that if we change the language to say it could be either, could someone do 100% of all of their training asynchronous, meaning that they never meet with anybody ever? So that would be my concern, that the language it opens an opportunity that it does not appear to be present to me, having looked at many online programs, that they never meet, that they do still have Zoom meetings, they have supervision, practicum. I mean, that's still a piece of that training requirement. Is it more flexible than it used to be? Absolutely, which is a good thing. But I think we're getting a little confused when we're adding when we're thinking about changing the language to say that it doesn't have to be synchronous ever.
I think that was the last discussion. I mean, and my personal opinion, this is personal, is the synchronous. It had to be there.
Or
Asynchronous is not-
50%. That's 30 credit hours.
Yeah, can we change that? That's what I'm wondering. I know that we've had this discussion at Fort Hays of requiring them to be on campus for skilled class so that can be evaluated, but that the skills for both group and individual skills, and then everything else be online.
Right. I think there are some things that can't be done synchronously Zoom. And that's the specific skills class. That's just not something that is done well asynchronously. It needs to be in person to be able to do that.
Definitely, particularly in the group counseling courses and in the techniques of counseling courses, it seems like there does need to be the personal face-to-face.
Beyond that, most of it can be asynchronous. I
But
mean,
even the supervision
with
piece,
some synchronous, but the reality is that for those, it really begs on the quality of it at that point.
The supervision as well.
yes, that's what was my point. My supervision piece. I mean, I learned macro skills in the Army. I didn't need to be there. Okay, they told me that online. But I think that the supervision piece, which is interactive, is the piece in which you grow and you. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, I have an issue with the whole everything is online. I have an issue with
But
that.
don't they get supervision when they're at the agency with whoever's supervising them, sees them in action, does videos or has a video with, a observation room. So they do get supervised during their internships and practicums by licensed professionals.
Yes, but it's a very different from a faculty member perspective. If you go to a place that only do psychoanalytical pieces, okay, and they don't get anything else outside from the psychoanalytical piece, that's all they do. They get the other piece for the faculty member.
Sure, but they can do that by Zoom, right?
I guess.
I mean, we had to do that during COVID.
I think you can absolutely do supervision online.
Sure.
That's not the same as, but how do you do supervision online without meeting someone?
No.
Well, this is a very good discussion. We're unfortunately running towards the end of the meeting. I do think it sounds like this would be valuable to discuss further, but it may be helpful to go ahead and maybe start with a change today that could be maybe discussed for possible additional changes in the future. I mentioned the other professions, the three that I talked about, had made the recommendation to remove that physical presence requirement. So perhaps if there's support today, perhaps maybe the advisory committee could vote on that piece of it, to remove that. And then maybe just temporarily including that language either in person or by synchronous video conferencing. That would make it consistent with the other professions who made the change, knowing that the advisory committee wants to continue to discuss this topic to see if other changes might be helpful. Would that be something that you would be comfortable with today, discussing proposed change to remove that physical presence? Basically what I'm talking about is the language that you have in there in red. So the strike through that required the physical location at the institution, and then at least right now, adding the language to allow either in person or by synchronous video conferencing to fulfill the face-to-face requirement.
I would make that motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. And so we will be sure to come back to this for all the nuances that you're bringing up that are important. I'm making notes about all that right now. Okay, David, where do you want to go from here, knowing our time? Well, I guess our time is over. We really can't do any more work right now.
Just about over. Maybe we could talk just for about a minute in terms of meetings for 2023. The advisory committee does meet every other month on the off months of the board meeting. Generally, we had met as an advisory committee the first Monday of those months. And Laura, you had sent me an email with those dates for meetings next year. And do you want me to go ahead? I could share my screen with those dates so people could take a look at them, or we could just go ahead and plan on that unless someone knows. Generally, the meeting time for these meetings has been from 10 a.m. until noon.
On the first Monday of the month.
So that would be February, April, June, August, and October and December, I believe.
Does anybody have any standing commitments that would be in conflict with that day and time? I don't see any yeses. So if there is anybody that has a standing conflict that's going to get in the way of that, please let us know. And we're flexible, we can adapt, but let's go ahead and count on those dates for now. And David, when you send out the next set of notes, do you want to send those out at that time?
You mean as far as the
next date for next year?
Sure. Yeah, I'll go ahead. What I'll do is I'll set up those meetings as Zoom meetings. So you should be getting calendar appointments with those dates and the times. And at the next meeting, perhaps we can talk about if you want to have any in-person meetings or hybrid meetings throughout the year. But most of those will probably continue to be remote meetings just because of the ability for us to have so many people across the state without having to worry about the things like travel, especially as we're approaching the winter months right now. So.
Sure. So let's talk next meeting. Let's talk about getting together at least once next year. You're all educators. I don't know if you're a lot less busy in the summer. Maybe that would be easier to do. But let's talk about that so we can meet in person.
And I think we should meet in San Francisco.
There you go.
Yeah. or San Diego.
I think that was a motion, wasn't it?
I thought you picked Scotland.
I'll go back to Scotland. I will go back to Scotland in a heartbeat.
Well, I'm sorry that we didn't get through all of our work. As you can tell, there's been a lot going on. And so we had a lot of things to cover and a lot of good discussions. So we will certainly pick up everything that we didn't get to address and bring it to you in the January or the February meeting.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, for all of you new members, welcome to the committee. Really appreciate you volunteering your time. If you do have questions between now and the February meeting, don't hesitate, send me an email and I'll be happy to help you out. So.
Thank you so much.
I'll note that Bob stayed the whole time.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas, Bob. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Maybe in
Bye-bye.
trouble for something I
Thanks,
missed,
everyone.
but I'm here.
I have a client in waiting and it got it wrong. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Do we need a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Okay, I need a motion to adjourn.
So
I
moved.
move.
We adjourn.
Okay,
I second.
all in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you for everything and happy holidays, everyone.
Yep.
Thank you likewise.
Thank you. Take care.